Good morning. My name is Hardin. I'm the Vice President for Programs and Policy at Refugees International. Thank you all for joining us in the midst of a busy week, especially with the UN General Assembly in full swing. A quick housekeeping note about our event today. It's being offered in English and Arabic, and to listen along to interpretation in Arabic, simply hit the global icon at the bottom of your screen and select the language you'd like to listen to. Recordings in both languages will be available following the event. This past July, the UN Security Council renewed the cross-border resolution authorizing UN agencies to provide aid from Turkey into Northwest Syria. But at Russian insistence, the mandate was cut from 12 months to 6 months. This has created significant challenges and uncertainties around the aid effort. And the outcome reflects diplomatic tensions within the Council, tensions that have been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. The July vote also underscored the fragility of the UN cross-border aid mechanism more broadly. There are 4.1 million people in need of aid in Northwest Syria, and 1.7 million of those people are internally displaced. This winter, when needs will be at their highest, these people will once again face the prospect of a Russian veto in the Council. That veto would close the Bab-al-Hawa crossing and leave millions of Syrians to fend for themselves. And despite the gravity of the situation, the crisis in Syria is no longer present really in terms of the kind of attention it needs to be getting at the global level. I'm in New York this week for the UN General Assembly, and sadly, Syria barely registers on the world body's collective agenda. This dearth of attention will make it extremely challenging to find adequate solutions to the crisis in the event of a non-renewal. However, donors and aid agencies must accelerate planning for that very scenario. Syrian NGOs and other civil society organizations must be at the center of and help lead that planning. So we are lucky today to be joined by representatives of leading Syrian civil society groups active in Northwest Syria. These groups came together last year to form the Syria Northwest Aid Continuation Task Force, and they have important ideas on the way forward. Some of these appeared in a recent Refugees International report on cross-border aid, and members of the task force who are joining us today were close partners in that initiative. But task force members are not alone in ringing the alarm bell over the prospects of a veto of the UN cross-border aid mechanism. Today, more than almost 40 Syrian-led organizations sent a letter to the UN Secretary General and the President of the UN General Assembly calling for a shift towards a sustainable approach to the humanitarian aid response in Syria. These organizations are on the front line of the crisis in the Northwest. They know firsthand the challenges posed by the end of cross-border aid. They and their families will face the consequences if international diplomacy fails in January. So we should listen closely to what they have to say. But before turning over the floor to the task force, we have a short message from a man who really needs no introduction. Jan Egeland is the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, and he is the former UN Emergency Relief Coordinator. And he has served as a senior envoy for the United Nations Secretary General on various aspects of the crisis in Syria, as well as on the Grand Bargain. Thank you.
Let me also start by saying how much we all appreciate, how much we all admire the work of the Syrian local and national groups. You've been there on the front lines since the start of this horrific, more than a decade-long war. You have bled while providing to women, children, the most vulnerable, who has been under horrific attack, under horrific crossfire, under horrific bombing, under horrific besiegement. It is one of the most heartwarming things to see how much Syrians have come to the relief of each other, and we international must recognize and do something about the attacks that you have sustained. You've lost many colleagues. Your hospitals have been bombed. Your convoys have been bombed. The discussion here is of course how to be able to transform, maintain, defend a lifeline for 4 million civilians in great need and under great peril in the northwest of Syria. It has come in the shadow of the war here up in Europe, in Ukraine. But it didn't get better in Northwest Syria because it got worse in Ukraine. It has gotten steadily worse all over Syria, but perhaps in particular in these most exposed areas, of which perhaps Northwest is the most exposed. Access is a principle for us, humanitarians. We cannot live without the access to the people in need. For us, access is closely tied to the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, independence, and impartiality. We go after needs and needs alone. And to provide for the people in need, we need the most direct, the most easy, the possible route. In the Northwest, there is no other route really than the cross-border line. So of course that has to be maintained and guaranteed. If there isn't cross-border relief, babies will die. So it is of course immoral that every 6 months now, for as long as I can remember, we have feared that that lifeline is cut. It would mean that babies will die, and forget about the bad guys on either side. It's a question about providing to children, to families, to women, to the most vulnerable. So the discussion on getting to something better than a 6-monthly countdown to possible disaster must be a priority for all of us. And I'm so happy you're doing that here. And finally, a word on localization, because I think Syrian NGOs, local and national NGOs, have showed us really the true potential of local and national organization taking over more and more of major relief operations. I'm the so-called eminent person of the Grand Bargain, and several Syrian local organizations, national organizations have helped to formulate positions that we're now wanting to roll out throughout the donor world and throughout the world of the large agencies. It is a common position that 25% of all of the resources really should go through the local groups. That is localization. Now it is worldwide at best 3%, but far away from the goal of really having enough resources go to the frontline organizations of and for the people themselves. We're also working on having overhead and capacity building really being institutionalized in the humanitarian system as such. I hope you can help also inform us and guide us on this. First and foremost, I wish to end by wishing you all the best in the future. I will be among those who will fight for the world not forgetting and not neglecting the 4 million people in the southwest of Syria that will go through now their 11th horrific winter soon. They will suffer, and their only hope is really that our lifeline can be sustained, transformed, and that we can end up with something much better than what we have today. Good luck with your meeting.
Hello, my name is Sabiha Khan, Senior External Relations Officer at Refugees International, and I will be moderating this panel discussion. Thank you to Jan Eglin for that important and timely message. As Jan said, Syrians have been coming to the relief of each other since the beginning of this conflict, engaging in life-saving and courageous work. I'm so grateful that we have a panel of knowledgeable advocates and dedicated professionals joining us here today. First, I would like to welcome Joseph Challoub. Joseph is Food Security and Livelihoods Working Group Coordinator in the Northwest Syria NGO Forum. Joseph has over a decade of experience in the humanitarian sector and has worked with dozens of Syrian organizations to deliver aid, but also to develop organizational capacity and support the recovery process in Syria. Hisham Dirani is Chief Executive Officer for Violet Relief and Development, a leading Syrian NGO with more than 2,000 volunteers and workers inside Syria. Hisham has an engineering background and was active in the development of a strategic WASH response plan in Syria, as well as the development of underground hospitals and many other projects. Dima Marrawi is Acting Advocacy Manager in the Syrian American Medical Society, Turkey office. Dima is an architect and a humanitarian professional with more than 10 years of experience, leading advocacy efforts related to Syria in many national and international forums, including the Emergency Task Force at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and the HLG Women Advisory Group. Hazem Rihawi is the Senior Programs Manager at the American Relief Coalition for Syria, ARCS, and co-chair of the co-chair of Interaction Syria Working Group. He's a pharmacist who graduated from Aleppo University in Syria and has a Master of Public Health degree from Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. He has over 9 years of extensive leadership experience in humanitarian responses, focusing on health and coordination. He's the former co-lead of the health cluster serving Northern Syria, and he's the former health cluster coordinator for Somalia. So obviously, given the credentials of our great panelists today, I'm sure people will have a lot of questions for them. Today's event will feature an audience Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to them at the end. So thank you to each of our panelists for taking the time to be here today. Let's get started. So first, if I can turn to Joseph. Obviously, the big fear now, something that Jan mentioned in the video and Hardin did as well, is the fear of the potential closing of Bab-al-Hawa crossing into the Northwest. But as you know, those in the Northeast have dealt with this reality already for years. How did the discontinuation of aid operations after the closure of Yarubeya affect people living in the Northeast, and how is it affecting them still?
Okay, thank you so much for this question, Sabiha, and greetings everyone from Hasake in Northeast Syria. Can you hear me well before I answer this question? Okay. Before I start answering, yes, you might be asking why someone from Northeast Syria is joining this panel, specifically on Northwest Syria, but because we were in a similar situation 4 years ago, and we had the cross-border resolution discontinued in 2020. So what I'm going to be saying now is the impact of this discontinuation on the people, organizations, and UN agencies in Northeast Syria, in the hope that the same does not happen in Northwest Syria. And I'm going to start by saying no one should make any mistake in assuming that the closure of the border will not have any impact on people living in Northwest Syria. We saw a big, drastic reduction of aid, coupled with a wide range of new challenges when the Yarubeya border was discontinued. And the best way to show you the impact is to tell you the story of a family that is living in Northeast Syria. Abu Ali is a father of 4 and he lives in Deir ez-Zor. He has diabetes and needs a steady supply of insulin shots. At the moment, If he's lucky, he gets it every 4 or 5 months from an NGO-funded clinic. If we go back 3 years ago, before January 2020, when Al-Yarubiya was a critical supply route for medical supplies, and when it benefited more than 50 health facilities supported by NGOs in Northeast Syria, Abu Ali back then was able to get insulin shots every other week. Like he was able to successfully get 1 dose of insulin every week sometimes. Now he's lucky if he gets it every 4 months. Why were these supplies able to be procured and transported in a sustainable manner? Because of the unique capacity of UN agencies to lead the logistics and obtain the bureaucratic approvals for supplying at scale and per specific technical and quality requirements, specifically for medical care. Following the closure of Al-Yarubiya, an already challenging health response, now even after 4 years, 3 years, apologies, faces additional bureaucratic impediments, and NGOs do not currently have sufficient logistical capacity, not even funding streams to bring in necessary supplies to account for this immediate loss. NGOs always attempted to diversify their approach to get medical supplies, but it is always subject to approvals, lengthy process, and these efforts were never able to fill the significant gap left behind with the closure of the Yarubiya crossing. Additionally, since I mentioned Abu Ali has diabetes, diabetes also requires healthy eating and stable access to good quality and diversified food. The operational and supply issues mentioned for the health supplies above also are faced by suppliers of food items. For example, NGOs at the moment rely on private suppliers based in Northeast Syria to procure food. And this is subject to challenges in the supply chain and cross-line and cross-border transportations, especially with Iraq. What it means to be dependent on suppliers locally is that it is subject to opening and closure of the border with Iraq, and we cannot sustain good quality diversified food, especially for cases of diabetes, other medical cases, and cases of malnutrition. Speaking of malnutrition, Abu Ali's daughter, Sarah, she's very cute, by the way, but unfortunately, she is acutely malnourished at 2 years old. A part of it is because of the quality and quantity of food, as mentioned above, that her and her family receives. As you know, acutely malnourished children require doses of plum peanuts and other nutritional supplements. Before 2020, when Yarubiya was open, UN agencies were able to successfully get in plum peanuts to Northeast Syria in a sustained manner. Now, Sarah and other malnourished children have to rely on less effective alternatives. And sometimes there are no alternatives altogether. And she is not unique, Sarah. You have thousands and tens of thousands even of children that are malnourished across NES. And without any resolution that sustains transportation of these sensitive nutritional items across border, these children, unfortunately at the moment, do not have any other alternative. I can tell you that this year, after 3 years, one NGO was able to transport a small batch of plum peanuts to Northeast Syria. Additionally, Abu Ali is a farmer. And up until 4 years ago, he used to benefit from agriculture support provided by UN agencies. He used to receive very good quality fertilizers, pesticides, equipment, irrigation systems, etc. All of it was transported through Yarubiya cross-border channels. After the closure, Abu Ali no longer had access to these good quality agriculture inputs. And this year, he stopped farming altogether and is considering moving to a city nearby to find alternative livelihoods. And unfortunately, also as well, at the moment in Northeast Syria, we have a cholera outbreak. Imagine if we had the Yarubiyya crossing still open. We would have had access to vaccines, testing, and treatment equipment for the water. So in addition to all his and his family's challenges, Abu Ali does not even know if he's drinking good quality water and does not have the equipment to clean and test the water that he accesses. If he was still a farmer, he wouldn't even have known if the water he uses for agriculture is clean or not. What this means is that there is no doubt that Northeast Syria suffers after the closure of Yarubiyya cross-border operations. Funding by UN agencies, operational and logistical capacities, and ultimately the amount and the quantity of aid that this border used to provide cannot be substituted and are, as I mentioned above, still not even close to be replaced by local and cross-line capacities. We fear the same will happen in Northwest. I stand corrected. We know the same will happen in Northwest Syria if the cross-border resolution is also not renewed in Northwest Syria. And here I will end my input on this one, and I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much, Joseph. That's really appreciate you, reminding everyone the real life consequences of these political decisions that are being made in New York and at the UN Security Council. Turning to the Northwest, I wanted to turn to Hisham and ask, if there is the case of non-renewal in January 2023 or 6 months later, what will you, as CEO of Violet, be facing the next day? What will you have on your hands? And then a second question, what should really happen in the long term, especially to decrease this dependency on emergency aid?
Thank you, Sabiha, and thanks also for Jan and Jose for the points that they brought to that event. Actually, in case of the non-renewal, either after 6 months or in January, after few months, the challenges that we will face as an NGOs, and also the most important is the challenges that the local communities, the people in need will face, that we will lose the access and the credibility of the access to people in need in Northwest Syria because of many reasons. Now the cross-border resolution since 2014 until now used to provide the legitimacy for the humanitarians to access the areas out of the government control and to get the aids into Syria without the approval of the government. What will be if the cross-border resolution discontinued is what we are facing now in Northeast Syria, and maybe more miserable situation because of also the sensitivity of the Northwest Syria and having a different type of de facto authorities over there and different stance of the states and donors when they are working in Northwest Syria. So first of all, we expect a huge cuts in the funds. Now we are facing already a huge cuts in funds because of the war in Ukraine, because of COVID, because the overall economic challenges in the world and the inflation that the impacts of that inflation appeared on especially the prices of the essential food items. Now the price of living in Northwest Syria is doubled and sometimes could be tripled comparing with 6 months before. the amount of money that's needed to get a family food secured is more than $200, comparing with maybe around $125 before. So first of all, the funding gap which we will witness as in humanitarians responding in Northwest Syria, and that will be cascaded to the people in need, because also we don't know how the risk appetite of the donors will be to respond in an area without a cross-border resolution like authorized from the Security Council. Also, the type of the programs that we will be able to implement, that also because of the limitation that we will face with the donors, and also maybe that will be also transferred to the international NGOs. Northwest Syria, people living in Northwest Syria, they are fully dependent on the services that we as humanitarians providing for them. We are running hospitals, schools, water stations, the solid waste management, and the bakeries. So the humanitarian NGOs, they are running the overall humanitarian facilities in Northwest Syria. And if we have not been able to continue that type of services, and we've been pushed to do more only distribution type of activities, so all of those facilities will be stopped, either especially the healthcare centers, hospitals, bakeries, and also education. And if there is an area in the world without education, without health, and without food, we can imagine how the living conditions would be for those people. Taking in consideration that still we are dealing with the implications of the huge displacement that happened at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, when more than 1.1 million people forcibly under the military operation displaced from southern Idlib to northern side of Idlib, and also to the northern side of Aleppo. Still, we are dealing with the implications of that huge displacement that happened. Still, we have more than 1.5 million people living in tents, with miserable situation in terms of sewage, water, health, and either food security. Imagine what could happen when we have the threat of the cholera outbreak reaching Northwest Syria. And we saw the first case in Jarablus in northern Aleppo a few days before, and that there is a huge possibility for that to be expanded. And then the area does not recover from the COVID-19 implications. The challenges that we could face also in terms of facilitating the access in that area, considering the HTS presence in Idlib, and the Salvation government, and the risks that come from their presence, and the control that they are implementing on the area, and the influences or the interferences that could be increased potentially if there is no cross-border resolution. That being said, and thinking about the long term, how it should be. So generally, when we talk about Syria and also Northwest Syria, the area should be stabilized. There should be a political solution, political transition in Syria that could stabilize the overall country, because we know that the suffering is not only in Northwest Syria, but also people in the government-controlled areas. Also, they are suffering, and also in Nes. But talking about the Northwest Syria and acknowledging the threat of the fully politicization of the cross-border resolution, and honestly saying that the recent resolution could not be considered as a humanitarian resolution, it's a resolution fully equipped within clauses that that is in favor or in favor of the conflict party, and it could like increase the level of that conflict in Syria. So what we are looking for is a sustained access for the humanitarian aids to reach, and humanitarian workers and organizations to reach the people in Northwest Syria, far from the politicization, far from the vetoes that we've seen and we will see in the or we could see in the future. Yes, that could be like a naive thing, but or like it could be like a dream of a child, but still, that what we are looking for as humanitarians, to have an access, a free access for the humanitarian NGOs and donors to reach those people in need, and to respond based on the needs assessment that we see on the ground, and not to be selecting modalities such to just to like convince or like make a confidence with one of the conflict parties or the veto holders. And that what happened in the last resolution, and also in the previous one. Still, what we could see on the in January is a possibility of only 6 months renewal. That's also like adding another responsibility on our shoulders as an NGOs, both national and international, and also the donors, to find a way to get that response far from the political like conflict between the countries. How? Still, we don't know. We know that there are a lot of legal limitations and challenges, and there are like some signals from the UN agencies that they will not be able to continue their funding, their programming in Northwest Syria without providing any alternative solution. Cross-line is not alternative solution. There is no alternative solution for the cross-border operations. So what we are advocating for is to find a way to continue this this cross-border operations. On the other hand, it's important to have an achievement in the localization agenda. Until now, and as Jan mentioned before, it's only 3% achievement all over the world. And still, as Syrian NGOs working in Syria cross-border, we don't feel that we are empowered. Still, we will struggle of like losing more than 65% of our resources in terms of the absence of the cross-border resolution, because we are receiving most of our funds either from the UN agencies or from the SCHF, the humanitarian pool fund for the cross-border. So finding a sustainability for the national humanitarian NGOs, so we can enable them to continue their operations and their support for people in need. Livelihood and early recovery should not be limited to the government-controlled areas. Early recovery and livelihood should not be only considering the services that provided from the government and their directorates. We saw how the resolution mentioned electricity and the other services, limiting that with the like areas under the government control. We think that acknowledging the risks that we are facing in Northwest Syria, but still we have to go beyond the distributions and to do more effective efforts in both in livelihood and early recovery. So we ensure that people that are less dependent on our aids, that we cannot give them any commitment that we are able to continue supporting them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hisham. And I want to invite actually Dima to weigh in here as well. You know, Hisham, you talked a lot about this tension or disconnect between what's happening in the UN Security Council and the needs and reality of people in Syria. I wanted to ask Dima, you know, what is the importance of the long-term interventions of NGOs like SAM's in light of the need to keep track of the UN Security Council negotiations every 6 months or 12 months, not knowing what will happen the next day? You know, in the video, Jan used the word immoral to describe that. So would you agree with that? And what's your perspective?
Yeah, thank you for having me today, and hello for everyone. I think I have more questions than answers about the situation regarding renewal or not renewal of the cross-border resolution. But what I can say that in the humanitarian response, there are services which we can never ask the affected population to wait for, such as food, water, and shelter and health. And these we can never delay or compromise our response to. For example, women who need to deliver their babies, what will happen to them if the health center near of them suddenly closes? Therefore, if we want to talk about the importance of the long-term response in the humanitarian context in Northwest Syria, especially in the health response, we must consider first the surface stability, that the health system strengthening requires continuous and sustainable supply of medical services that runs without any interruption for the purpose of developing or building a health system in the region. Second is to developing the capacities of our health workers in the facility. And third, ensuring the availability of the medical equipment. But regarding the health response and how much it is concerning to the situation and continuation of the cross-border aid resolution, we know that the mandate of the health funding provided by the UN covers the response gaps that the private funds we have cannot cover. So the idea of a scenario that prevents this type of coverage creates devastating gap in the health response. So the projects funded, whether long or short term, under the legitimacy of the resolution, are threatened with collapse in case of the resolution is not renewed without a clear plan and a transitional step to achieve safe and accountable closure of these projects. Also, the NGOs have the advantage of a complete executive structure to implement the UN projects effectively and efficiently. They have developed their structures and procedures and proves their eligibility to manage the financing and implementation at the same time. So what is required now is that donors are able and are willing to increase the funding for these organizations during the upcoming short remaining period, which is almost 3 months, I think. So there is also an important point for discussion here, that we are always talking about accountability toward the affected population, as it is the essence of the humanitarian work. So we must ask, how will the UN ensure accountability towards the affected population who will be cut off from aid without a clear plan or a transitional step that guarantees no interruption of the basic services mentioned earlier from our colleagues. I would also to raise another question to the UN, considering that we are partners of the UN agencies and that the funding passes through them to the NGOs. If you regard donors as one financing channel and NGOs as trustworthy and eligible partners to you, what action did you take to facilitate establishing direct communication between donors and these NGOs? Second, the presence of the UN is quite linked to the continuation of the resolution, as we see. So it is the UN's sole responsibility to ensure that the funding allocated to reach the beneficiaries under their mandate will remain continuous and will not be interrupted by non-renewal. As all of you know, we are now in the process of preparing for an outbreak, for an endemic epidemic in Northwest Syria because of the lack of adequate water and sanitation infrastructure, and because of the collapse in the health system. So it is not allowed to stop or to interrupt the support for basic humanitarian services for any reason. On the other hand, we as advocator knows that the advocacy that we adopted until today has never amounted to improving the form of the response we provide. We are still advocating for the provision of minimum standard of basic services for a decent life in a very raw context in which the Syrian government as a state obligated to provide basic humanitarian needs to its residents, such as electricity, health, education, water, access to food, access to decent shelter, it continues to violate access to those rights for the residents of Northwest Syria. On the other hand, we are facing an international threat. Security Council might end up not being renewed or shorten the resolution duration for each rotation. So focusing on humanitarian principles and avoiding politicization, as Mr. Hisham said, of this response has become an urgent request, and it is not in the hands, it is in our hands and in the hands of the UN. So the responsibility to find an alternative solution to the non-renewal is not in the hands of just NGOs, but rather it is the responsibility of the UN. So will they be obligated to provide concrete solutions to meet the current approach in the quantity, quality, frequency, and utilization of resources available in the targeted communities in case of non-renewal? Actually, while I'm speaking, Sam's team informed me that there are new 6 cholera cases registered in Northwest Syria. I just want to be sure that you all are doing the best for the families of those 6 cases. We are talking about children, women, elderlies, not just only persons, to ensure to not lose their beloved ones. What we will say to the children who probably lose their parents because of the cholera, which might unfortunately become tens and hundreds in the coming days. Over, and thank you for having me again.
Thank you, Dima. And this actually, leads into my question for Hazem about the role of and the responsibility of the UN. As Interactions Syria Working Group co-chair, Hazem, you've engaged with donor countries, international NGOs, and UN headquarters. What do you see are the priorities to ensure continuation of aid in Northwest Syria in the case of non-renewal?
Thank you so much, Sabiha and Refugees International, for inviting me to speak on this important topic. My previous colleagues have explained eloquently the current situation in Northwest, Northeast of Syria, and operational planning and hurdles in case of non-renewal of the resolution. As a representative of Syrian American humanitarian organizations here in Washington, we make sure that to deliver these exact messages you've heard from Syrian NGOs directly to the US government, donor countries, UNHQ in New York, and UN Security Council members, to emphasize the unity of Syrian humanitarian approach in coordination with our colleagues in the international NGO community, and to ensure that these messages are not diluted through diplomatic channels. As you know, access is a top priority in the Syrian humanitarian crisis due to the politicization of humanitarian aid in Syria, especially the method of delivery of this aid to vulnerable civilians, mainly by the Russian and the Syrian governments. And thus, rather than talking about increasing, improving the efficiency of humanitarian aid to all affected people in Syria, the humanitarian community and mainly the international and Syrian NGOs, we spend our energy every year, and unfortunately now every 6 months, explaining to the 15 countries on the Security Council the gravity of the humanitarian situation in Syria and the need for UN agencies, the largest humanitarian entities globally, to continue their mandates in responding to the Syria crisis, which is one of the largest humanitarian crises the world has ever witnessed, in the most direct, most effective pathway possible. Every 6 to 12 months, we're dragged to negotiate with specifically one Security Council member, permanent member, and we're forced to accept the least harmful option to ensure that these UN agencies continue to deliver the different forms of aid to all people in northwest of Syria with no conditions or interruptions. This lengthy start, I started very long on this, but this lengthy start is to complement the picture that has been drawn by my colleagues working on the field in Syria, in all parts of Syria, and to explain how the UN Security Council cross-border resolution has been distracting the entire humanitarian community from doing what it's supposed to do, saving lives, and delaying and politicizing the important discussions about modalities that will transform the aid from emergency response to stabilization and longer-term solutions. So to answer your questions, the Syrian humanitarian response in general, the NGO community, the Syrian NGOs community, we're taking a three-pronged approach. So for us, we start with the first priority, is to ensure that the short and medium-term plans that are designed by our colleagues in the NGO community are well funded by donor countries to minimize the impact of any possible interruption of aid in northwest of Syria. In addition, we definitely want the UN to continue. We definitely want to ensure that UN agencies as major stakeholders in humanitarian response can continue their humanitarian mandates through the cross-border mechanism legally. So in the coming couple of weeks, ARCS will be publishing a legal study that has been conducted by a group of specialist international lawyers supporting the legality of continuation of cross-border aid in Syria without a UN Security Council mandate at this point of the Syria humanitarian response. So that we ensure that the reliable delivery of this vital aid might be immunized from political debate. Lastly, and the third thing is we are applying pressure on donor countries to use this opportunity to accelerate the implementation of transformative modalities, mainly early recovery, funding in all sectors, as Hisham said, and definitely localization. For example, on localization, we are trying to create a pathway for donors to facilitate this direct funding And one way we are looking at it is Syrian diaspora organizations can play a key role as first implementers of localization due to their unique position as trustworthy organizations in Syria and in the donor country that they belong to. So while both transformative modalities are facing politicization, unfortunately, and other obstacles within the bureaucracies of donor countries, we think that there are no other viable options to reduce dependency of aid and allow for stabilization and resiliency building in those communities that have been suffering in the past 11 years. Thank you again, Sabiha, and I look forward to answering all questions.
Thank you, Hazem. So we have a couple of questions from the audience, actually. And the first question is, since the start of the war in Ukraine, have donations decreased to Syria? Does it appear that aid that would have been given to Syria has been diverted to other parts of the world? I don't know if Hisham, if you wanted to weigh in here. I know you talked a little bit about funding, or anyone else wants to jump in.
Thank you, Sabiha. So generally, we are witnessing like a funding cuts and decrease in funding since the COVID, then the overall like economy challenges, then also that being like increased with the start of Ukraine war. Yes, some of the donors, they moved their funds or part of their funds actually to surge it to Ukraine, and that's affected their funds to Syria. So it's not they're allocated new funds, but they shifted some of their funds towards Ukraine. How we are, some of the I think few donors they are more focusing now on funding Ukraine and shifting completely from funding the humanitarian operations in Syria, and also some of the the NGOs also they shifted their focus to start their response in Ukraine. How that's affected the response in Syria? Already the humanitarian response plan, the HRP for Syria, is funded with not more than maybe 30% of what is needed. Adding to that, there is an inflation in the prices. So what if $60 was enough to buy a food basket, now the cost is more than $80 or $90. So the prices are inflated in Northwest Syria. So the impact of this decrease of funding is not linear. It's going that way because of the inflation and the other causes. But yes, many donors, let's say some donors, they decreased their funding and they shifted that to Ukraine. Some donors still they are not clear about how they will release the funding, either when we are in September, so almost like 3 months to end of that year and the fiscal year. Yeah.
Hazem,
yeah, I can add to what Hisham is saying, is that we are hearing from donor countries always that it will be really a struggle to sustain funding, and we can anticipate immense cuts in the coming years. The thing is that there are so many big crises around the world, including North Ethiopia, Tigray, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and others. So it's always the discussion about competition, unfortunately, between these crises, which makes it really difficult to be able to sustain. And it's 11 years, so we've been always warned about this, but at the same time, we're trying our best to create solutions for them. We always say that this is why localization and early recovery are really key point at this juncture. So it's just to add what Hisham is saying to confirm what is actually he replied to.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have another question from the chat. This question is for Joseph. What lessons could be learned from the Northeast Syria experience to mitigate the implications of non-renewal of the cross-border? What are practical steps NGOs, INGOs, donor countries can take to move forward?
That's a difficult question, but I would say implement changes even if the cross-border resolution is renewed. What this means is do not wait until there's a rejection on it to start working on localization, because by then it will be too late. From Northeast Syria, what we learned is invest in localization and local capacities as much as possible, and not just in terms of percentage of funding, but also across all 6 components of localization, from representation, accountability, advocacy, capacity building, partnership principles, etc. Also, invest in engaging with the private sector, because one of the biggest challenges that will be faced in case the resolution is not renewed is cross-border logistics and transportations, which in the absence of UN agencies' operational capacity, the private sector can hold. And I know it's a challenge for the humanitarians to work at this scale with the private sector, but I think if we do it, it will mitigate a lot of the shortcomings and capacities, especially cross-border operational capacities that humanitarian organizations have. And finally, be as efficient as possible. With the reduction of funding, each and every single dollar should be carefully examined. Who is getting what and where, who's excluded, who's included. Why are we giving out food baskets instead of investing in local production of food? And for this one, I hold all stakeholders accountable, from local partners up to donors and UN agencies.
And actually, I wanted to see if, kind of along these same lines, if Hazem, Dima, or Hisham wanted to weigh in on what are other practical steps that, INGOs, NGOs, donor communities, the UN can take between now and January to do what Joseph said, ensure that there's this investment in the long-term aid response.
Thank you, Sabiha, for that question. Actually, now it's a shared responsibility for everyone, because all of us, we assume ourselves as a humanitarian. So it's a humanitarian responsibility to people in need. So donors, UN, INGOs, and national NGOs, regardless of their role in the future, if there's no cross-border resolution, they have to be engaged effectively on developing the alternative modality and the business continuity plan for that humanitarian response. There is no excuse for any one of those to say that we will not have a role in the implementation, so we will not participate. And unfortunately, that's what we are hearing from the UN agencies. So UN, they are saying that we will not be in the cross-border response if there is no resolution, and that's why we will not be engaged with the planning for the discontinuity of the cross-border resolution. And also how the donors are dealing also with the situation. Still, there is no clear guidance from the donors how they will deal with the funding they are channeling for the Syrian people in need in Northwest through the UN agencies to be channeled through another channels. Still, we did not get any clear guidance or position from the donors of how that. either the funds that are channeled through the SCHF, so the Humanitarian Pool Fund, or through the UN agencies. And unfortunately, there is a two contradictory business continuity like ways now. UN are trying sometimes to promote for like channeling or continuing part of the response through their missions in Damascus, while they know with an evidence that cross-line will not be an alternative for the cross-border operations. And also like on the other hand, there's no clarity about how those programs will be transferred. What we have to get is a paper that includes all of the activities, programs that are implemented now in Northwest Syria, with who is doing what, then how that will be continued in case of the discontinuity of the cross-border resolution, with clear responsibility for all of the stakeholders. Still, we are far from that paper. Syrian NGOs like to proposed a paper part, like a proposal about that, and the and for the UN and donors and NGO and INGOs, but unfortunately UN, they refuse to be part of that, and we did not hear like also a clear position from the donors. If we need to plan and to be ready for the time of the where we don't have cross-border resolution, we have to take serious steps before at least 6 months. At least 6 months. Then we start to build the capacity. But now we're having like only 4 months ahead of the vote. There's no way. And what is happening actually before the vote, and that what happened in the last time, is that it's like people were like panic and no one know what to do and how they will deal with the case. UN from the nowhere came and say that, listen, we cannot continue any of our projects that we are contracting now with you as an NGOs, both international and national. That was not the case like 2 weeks before the vote. So we have to be clear about all of the risks and how we will mitigate that, because otherwise we will not have any answers to tell for the people living in the tents, people who are waiting for our services, the pregnant woman that that's like going to the maternity hospital, while then she will face that the hospital is closed and the clinics are closed, the bakeries are closed. Yes, it will not close like immediately the day after, but then maybe after a month or less than that, because of also the low achievement in the localization. The local NGOs, they don't have that much of like resources to deliver and to cover in the absence of the cross-border resolution. That's from my end, and I'll leave it to like Dima, Hazem, and the other colleagues to elaborate more.
Great, Dima, if you want to go ahead before we close, thanks.
Yes, please. One quick comment adding to what Hisham said, that there should be an awareness of the seriousness of the humanitarian response in Northwest Syria as a whole, in light of the non-renewal by the UN and the Security Council. Because any countries or parties that will vote on the resolution, if it is suspended, must propose an alternative. For example, the maternity hospitals in areas of Qah, Al-Dana, Rajo, and Idlib cover about 1,300 birth cases per month and are fully funded by the UN agencies. So we ask UN agencies, what is their plan to continue financing these hospitals and thus guaranteeing the continuation of the basic medical services support to the thousands of women and newborns. Thank you, and over from my side.
Thank you, Dima. And I think that's really an excellent place to end, looking forward. And you know, as Hisham said, this is a shared responsibility now to people in need. So thank you to our amazing panelists, to Jan Eglin, to Hardin Lang, and to our great co-sponsors, Syria Civil Society Networks Platform, Syrian NGO Alliance, and American Relief Coalition for Syria. And finally, thank you to the audience at home for attending and contributing to today's live dialogue. Thank you so much.